Hey, what's up guys? JB here, and welcome back to Future Look. Today we're going to be looking ahead at the lightning elements with a new summer seasonal unit in Summer Helena. Now, we've never before seen a 100 cost seasonal unit. This is actually a first for that. On the other hand, it's not really all that unexpected because this is actually a fan voted unit on the Japanese side. And those do have a tradition of being 100 cost. Now, this unit is supposed to be a younger, maybe a more fun version of Helena. The design does look great, but will she have the kit to actually back it up, especially considering that 100 cost tag? So let's dive into it here and find out. Now, as I said, Summer Helena is a 100 cost lightning unit. She has a base 3/1 movement, and she can wear hats and cloth. And let's start with the TMR. We have her rose hairpiece here, and this is a very nice effect here on this one, if somewhat boring, I'd say. And it's just a straight damage increase on this one with a 25 human killer to magical attacks. So I think this is actually a really nice effect for pretty much any magical damage dealer out there, with the exception of Ibarra. She actually brings a similar buff, natively within her kit. All right, moving into Helena's stats here next, and we have sort of just a very flat graph going on here, as you can see. And that's just kind of where things stand with her, as a unit, when it comes to her base stats. Her new job is very similar to the Energist jobs that we've seen before on Valentine, Salir, and Garvel. And they've typically had lower base stats, and compared to some other mages out there, and then their passives sort of make up for that. But that is more or less what we're seeing as well with Helena here. Very average across the board. Now, as you can see, her HP, Dex, and Luck are all hovering right at or just below the UR average. I will say though that in terms of HP, it is actually in a pretty decent spot when you compare it amongst some other mages out there. Her innate magic total here does get to a respectable total here as well when we are factoring in the board nodes, and that innate agility does squeak above the UR average at 65. In terms of her accuracy and evade totals, very pedestrian numbers here, and definitely not very well suited for those kind of builds, especially when it comes to evasion. All right, touching on her mastery ability here real quick, she does notably get a 20% innate magic res penetration, which is very nice. And aside from that, just a 10% magic bump here as well. Moving into the defensive stats here for Summer Helena, and we're looking at 4 base defense and 0 spirit. Meanwhile, the resistance is, actually not too bad. We have a 10% to slash and magic, with a 15% to missile damage. So decent enough resistances here, especially considering these are the 3 primary damage types in the game. On the more negative side, she does have a 10% weakness when it comes to strike damage, and normally I do throw that one out. But we did actually look at Yual in my last video, and she is an Earth strike-based unit, so definitely someone that Helena will have to be wary of in the future. Now, I do have marked here in red the neutral pierce damage for her as well, and that's just due to units like Oberon and Noctis who do carry that damage type, within her elemental counter as well. And I will say Oberon in particular did get a pretty nice Mastery 2 upgrade recently on the Japanese side, so an already good unit is just getting better there, and someone to definitely watch out for Summer Helena. Looking at her ailment resistances here next, and they're really not the greatest. She does get slow at a 50% resistance, and there's really not that many damage dealers out there that carry that status ailment. Really the only one coming to mind for me would be Final Fantasy XIII's Claire, which does have a 50% chance to slow, which is very good. Now, Helena does also get a 50% stun resistance as well, which I do actually like that one, and that could actually be pretty good if you're going up against an ice team featuring Snow. He does have that stun on his limit burst. All right, let's move on to the passives and counters, and let's see what sort of build options that we have here for Helena. And really, I should say that there's really not all that much in terms of options here. Now, as we see on many units out there, she does have her passive 1, which is kind of an always on for her, and that's because it's giving her a massive 60% magic boost. And that boost is definitely going to get her up to a pretty solid magic level. You do actually trade off 5% HP in order to equip this passive, but it's really not all that big of a deal. That really amounts to maybe around 150 HP or even a little bit less, so really not all that material. Now, pairing with that, in most cases, I'm going to be opting for passive number 3, and this is really just the Blade Soul passive, and that's going to give you 12% agility and 12 spirit. Now, if you wanted to, you could take her Holy Knight's protection from her Paladin subjob, and that's going to give her 12% HP and 12 defense. That option is there, but I really think it's more niche use. I think in most cases, you're really going to be wanting to have that agility on Helena here. Now, noticeably absent from all of these passives is any form of spirit penetration or additional magic penetration, and I think that is definitely a concern that we're going to want to keep an eye on as we go through this review. Now, looking at her counters, I really don't love the options that she has here. For starters, counters, they all only have a 20% chance to proc off. She does get Paladin's Guard, which could be okay to use if you're going up against more physical-based teams. In terms of which one I would use here, it's kind of a toss-up for me. She does from her main job get this retaliation counter with a 50% magical scaled modifier. But even at that, a 50 mod isn't really all that much damage, and it's only a 3 range, so it's really not that high of a range either. So her counters here are just kind of a dud for me. I really would have liked to have seen that new counter from her main job, maybe be a preemptive, and maybe with a bit more range on it too. I think that for squishier units like mages, having a preemptive counter can actually save them in a lot of situations if they're able to get that and finish off the enemy before they actually take the damage. Now, as sort of last minute additions here, the white mage upgrades have gone live in JP, and it did actually include 2 revisions to some skills here on this page, so I will touch on them real quick. The Nullified Doom passive, which is passive number 2 here, did actually receive an upgrade which will add 24% magic to this passive. So you could opt to use that maybe instead of the agility passive. Again, I think it's kind of more niche, maybe if you're trying to go for a balls to the wall, maybe all out damage build. One of the other changes that White Mage is getting is an upgrade to the Regenerator counter ability, which is option number 2 here in the counters list. And when that counter triggers, it's now going to give a 20% healing power to the unit. And I do actually like this change in general for some White Mages out there. For Helena specifically, I'm kind of mixed on it. To actually trigger that healing power upgrade, you would need to have taken a hit in battle. And at least in autoplay, the only situation where Helena is going to be looking to heal is going to be at the very beginning of a battle when she is out of enemy range and maybe she has a teammate or her herself is low on health. Since she has an attack-focused AI, when this is presumably triggered in the Rind fight and enemies are in range, she's not going to be looking to heal in those situations. Despite that though, there are actually some nice uses for this 20 healing power that I think that she could take advantage of, and I think considering these 2 options I'm going to talk about, I may actually be moving and looking at using this passive on her in the future. And for one, the regen potency is increased by 20% with that healing power. So if she was getting 1000 a tick on that regen, she would then go to 1200 instead. The other situation is, as we'll look at in her skills here in a few minutes, she does actually have an absorb attack, which the potency of the absorb would be increased by that healing power as well. So I do think that those elements combined actually do make this regenerator counter ability pretty interesting and maybe somewhat usable, especially when I look at the other passives and not really being too in love with those ones. So something that I'll definitely play around with and test once the White Mage job revisions do come to global in the future. All right, so let's dive into Helena's all-new main job and let's see what sort of skills and abilities she's going to bring to the table. And starting with her buffs, and the first one here is a self-only Curata level heal, which also will restore 15% to her TP. Now you may be asking yourself, why TP? For damage dealers, that's really rarely a concern in PvP. But hold that thought, table it, we'll come back to it here in a couple of minutes. This is a decent enough skill, if you've taken damage, in manual play, you could use this to heal yourself up. Otherwise though, in terms of autoplay, as we were just talking about in the last section, this is something that she may look to use on herself if she is out of enemy range. Alright, her second buff here is a cross AoE centered on herself, and it brings 2 effects. The first one is a 40% attack and magic buff that will go to herself and the party. And the second part of the buff is actually self-only, and it is an all-new mechanic for War of the Visions. And what this does is it's buffing her skill potency with an additional 50% modifier, and that's going to come at the cost of her TP pool. So her skills, in addition to consuming her AP, will now also consume a portion of her TP as well. And how this works is it's actually half of the AP cost. So a 30 AP skill would actually cost an additional 15 TP on top of that. Pretty interesting ability here. I was actually doing some damage mocks on this with that magic up and 50 modifier, and this was akin to maybe a 20% damage increase, across her various skills. So this is a very nice power up and definitely will make her attacks quite scary while this is active. All right, moving into her attacks here next. Her low AP skill is a range 4, range height 1, it's a 121% mod, and this one is actually going to increase her CT by 25 after use. So if she sits in place while using that, she'll be roughly halfway to her next turn, which is pretty cool. And it could potentially be used to double turn an opponent, depending on how the CT is lining up. And that's even feasible for the AI to accomplish in auto, since the AI does like to turn to these low damage attacks to finish somebody off that is on low health. And that's because this would actually be the cheapest way to kill them. All right, her second skill here is a range 4 with a range height of 1. This time it has that large 200% modifier. And this one is a guaranteed 100% hit attack, and it will decrease the evasion of the target by 30 on top of it. So this is a good way to boost the general hit chances of your team. And we haven't really seen all that many guaranteed hits in War of the Visions as of late. And with the poor accuracy that we were seeing there in the base stats, this is definitely something that Helena will need. Really nice skill here though overall, especially since it's bringing that large damage mod. Her third skill is a range 3 with a +2 on the AoE with a range height of 1 with an additional 1 on the area of effect. It has a medium 165% mod and it brings 2 effects with it. The first one comes pre-damage and this one is actually going to remove courage. Post-damage it has a 25% chance to stop the targets. Very nice skill here with that large diamond AoE, and this is actually the largest AoE we've seen with the stop status tied into it. That courage removal is also very handy, and notable that even if this skill misses, because that is coming pre-damage, the courage will still be removed on any unit it hits. Alright, the final skill here is a range 3 with an additional on the AoE with a range height of 1, again with another 1 on the area of effect. We have a medium 165% mod, and this skill is also a guaranteed hit for Helena, this time coming with that cross AoE. So this one is actually very similar to Detonation Blast, just with a little bit less range. Now this skill, as I was alluding to earlier, is that 30% damage absorption. So depending on how many units you actually hit with this, it's really not out of the picture for Helena to be able to full heal herself or close to it with this skill. So it definitely could help her out quite a bit, if she's taken any damage on the way into engaging the enemy. Now this one is actually very notable as well because this is actually her only non-reflectable magic skill as well. Alright, last up is her Limit Burst here, and just like Dark Helena before her, this one is bringing that large diamond pattern. And prior to the damage, this one is bringing 2 effects. First, it's going to dispel the shell status, and then on top of that, it's going to imperil the area resist of the targets by 30. And again, since these effects are coming prior to the damage, you will be getting value out of these debuffs, even if you end up missing your targets. So this is a very nice limit burst. It's going to do massive damage, just like Dark Helena before her. And we really haven't seen all that many area resistant perils in the game thus far, so it is definitely notable for that reason as well. Helena's subjobs are up here next, and her main job actually brings 2 pretty nice skills. The first one is another self buff. This time it's going to give a 20% lightning resistance penetration, as well as 40% magic res penetration. Now to this point, we really haven't seen all that much elemental resist penetration in the game. The only one that I can even think of is UR Zazan's TMR. So there is some value in this buff if you're anticipating going up against enemies, that do have high resistance in either of these areas. Now the next skill here is a range 3 with a range height of 1. It has that medium 165% mod, and after the damage it's imperiling the magic resist of the target by 38%. So I can definitely see some uses for these skills, but I think it may be more of a niche or maybe a PvE pick, in most cases. Now, in addition to that, she is getting White Mage and Paladin as her subjobs, and starting with White Mage, she's going to get Curaga as the level 12 skill in lieu of Full Life. Otherwise, standard fare White Mage skills here. And as we were talking about earlier, White Mage has gotten its job revision on the Japanese side just this week, and I am a bit mixed on the job upgrades, to be honest. It did get a couple of nice buffs on some skills which Helena doesn't have access to, but Curaga, which Helena does have, did get a pretty decent upgrade as well, and that buff is turning it into a large diamond area of effect rather than the cross area of effect that it is today. But really, most of the White Mage job revisions are really focused on increasing the healing potency and healing power of the job, and they really didn't do much of anything to address one of the main drawbacks of the White Mage skills in my view, which is the casting time and lack of instant healing that the job has. And unfortunately, when it comes to support and healing skills, if you don't have that casting reduction innately, it's very difficult to build it up via other means. So I think most White Mages out there really would have appreciated a cast time reduction rather than a 24% magic increase. And that's really the case for Helena here as well. As we've looked at in the passives and so far in the kit, she has no way to reduce her casting time. And besides that issue, it's kind of questionable how much usage she would actually even get out of these skills, especially when we're talking autoplay. As we've seen in the past with Classy Glassy, who also has the White Mage subjob, she's only looking to use those skills when the enemy is out of range. So in that regard, I mostly see this job as maybe more of a PvE choice, or maybe something to use if courage is banned. All right, her last job we're going to talk about here, I think, is going to be the de facto pick for her in most circumstances, and that is her Paladin subjob, with the main reason that she is actually getting Immortal Spirit from this job, and that's going to allow her to survive fatal damage one time. She does also get Sentinel from this job, which to this day is still a pretty nice tool for approaching an enemy, especially in manual PvP. The physical slashing skills that are coming along with this Paladin job aren't really going to be all that interesting for her. She has no attack to speak of, so they're really not going to be doing her all that much good. The Paladin job, though, is one that is still waiting for its job revision updates, and one thing on my wish list would be to get a second cast of Courage, and I think a lot of units out there would really like to get their hands on that one, including Helena here. All right, next up we have my future consideration section, and the week following Helena's release, JP has got this vision card, and this one is Dark Ramu. And this one is the latest in the Dark Esper dual element vision card series, and this one is effective for both lightning and wind, and it sort of follows the pattern that we've been seeing on these cards, where the main element, in this case lightning, has a protector that they can bring in a dual element party. And in this case, that is the wind element, who does have the innate advantage over lightning's counter element, which is earth. Now, as is custom for these 90 cost cards, they really separate themselves in terms of the base stats that are included on the card. And the stats here kind of speak for themselves in that regard, particularly in terms of that HP and magic value. Very nice bestowed ability here on the card as well, giving that 10 missile resistance and 20 spirit penetration. And it's really not all that common to see spirit penetration on a vision card, especially when it's not limited to a specific unit. And as we talked a little bit about earlier, Helena is definitely going to be wanting to get her hands on that spirit penetration. She doesn't have any innately in her kit. For the party effect, similar to the original Ramu, this one is giving that 50% party magic, and adding to that, we have 10% slash res and 15% earth resistance. And that earth resistance is very nice in particular to help level the playing field a little bit against your elemental counter, especially when you can now bring a wind unit to tag along with you and kind of put your finger on the scale there. There aren't very many elements out there that have gotten this capability to actually counter their counter, with this type of resistance on their card. So this is going to be a very nice card to get your hands on for lightning players. I think my only knock on this one is I would have liked to have seen single target resistance here instead of that slash resistance. It's something that we had seen on the other Dark Esper cards thus far, but this is still a very nice vision card nonetheless. Now the wind element being included here on this card is interesting for another reason, as we have actually just seen wind on the Dark Tetra card before this one. So this kind of signals to me that we'll be seeing at a minimum 12 of these dual element vision cards as we go forward. And that would have all 6 elements as both the protected and the protectee, in terms of the elements that they share the card with. That of course would be leaving out dark and light from that equation, but who knows what they end up doing with those. They actually both do have 90 cost vision cards at their disposal already with the Bahamut and Anima vision cards. Something tells me that they're probably not going to leave them out of that there, but something to keep an eye on for sure. So there will be a new glove weapon coming alongside Helena, and I have this one translated as the Elven Glove. And in this case, I am highlighting the magic version here, since Helena does have a couple of guaranteed hits at her disposal. Decent enough base stats on this for a +5 MR with that 162 magic, and really not much else. Now adding to that, it does get a 20 spirit penetration passive, and that's a passive that Helena definitely wants to have access to somewhere in her equipment. I do have to say though that I am a little bit puzzled by this item. While it's certainly nice to have another glove option in the game for energists and other like jobs, we've only had the dark glove, here for quite a while now. That said, this item does seem like a step back in terms of other equipment that we've been looking at recently. And I think it's more akin to the equipment that we're used to here on Global right now. As we've talked about in my videos, all of the latest equipment on the Japanese side has had 3 or sometimes even 4 passives tied into them, which has really upped the ante, in terms of what we are expecting from equipment in our main slots. And I think this one just kind of rips the rug out a little bit from what we've been seeing there. So I am kind of questioning, why are they doing that? And really the only thing that I could come up with was that they want to actually release this item and Helena together on Global as a package, because that's definitely been a pain point in the past with our seasonal units. We waited forever to get Halloween Frederica's sword or Summer Kill Phase axe. And in fact, we're still waiting more than 8 months for Winter Luartha's spear. So if that ends up being the reason, I think that's fine. Maybe they'll turn around and give this a +6 relatively soon and maybe add passives onto it at that point. Otherwise, I'm just kind of lost on what they're doing there. Moving into our 2022 timeline, and of course, we've just gotten Dark Fina here on Global. And if we were to get Summer Helena, it probably would be coming sometime over the next couple of weeks. That is actually when the Japanese side was getting Elena for the first time. So I am expecting a new unit here over the next couple of weeks. It could be Helena, or it could be a new Global exclusive wind unit. We'll just have to see what happens. Now, in terms of other things to look forward to for the lightning elements, of course, we have been eyeing that 2.5-year anniversary in my videos for some time now. And that, of course, has Final Fantasy XIII's lightning. I have done a full preview on her kit, so if you haven't seen that one, I will put a link to that one above. Now, also coming in that 2.5-year anniversary will be the return of Final Fantasy Tactics. And that, of course, is going to have Thunder God Cid. And in my view, he already had a very nice EX upgrade for a cost 80 units. But just this week on the Japanese side, the Night Job has gotten significant upgrades. And honestly, I think he is just going to be legit now. The Night Job is getting a passive ability which gives 15% HP and 40% slash res penetration. And not only that, but the Trinity Break skill gets an additional 40% slash res penetration that it has as an active buff. Remember, here on Global, we do have the Aigan vision card buff for that slash res penetration, as well as Esther's vision card for 35% for the party. So considering all that, it's going to be very easy to get Orlando into a place where he's going to be ignoring slash res entirely, and he's going to be doing some serious damage. Now, in terms of the elemental wheel adjacencies for lightning, water will be seeing the return of Summer Elsorel, now new and improved with her Mastery 2 ability. And we will have Chunak coming as well just after the 2.5-year anniversary. Now, in terms of the water elements, I'm really not sure how much we're going to be seeing these units around in PvP. You know, they're solid enough units, but I'm not sure that they really move the needle all that much for the water element in terms of PvP. Now, on the flip side, in terms of the earth elements, we do have Queen Macherie, and we are expecting her here in Global in the next few weeks. Very high damage magical threat with large area of effect damage. We will have the return of 2 Earth missile units with Summer Lilith and Mustadio. And then further down the line, we have Yual, which is a unit that I just previewed in my last video. And Yual, you know, while she's definitely not the greatest against magical attacks, she does actually specialize in courage removal, which is of particular concern to Helena here, and will definitely have the potential to one-punch Helena here, literally. Now, prior to getting Yual, you know, will we end up seeing a new Earth piece here along the way? We don't really know, but, you know, I do know a lot of people out there would like to see one. So aside from that, not really much else to say here. But, you know, the lightning element is already one of the strongest elements today in Global. And I think considering these upcoming releases, it is poised to be in an even better position kind of going into the future. So the outlook is definitely looking up for lightning. All right, so I have put together a mock build here for Helena. And this week, my build goal is going to be going up against a light evasion team. And that's going to be featuring Violet and Elena. And they're going to be sitting behind a tank like an Engelbert or a Warrior of Light. Now, I think this is a team that many of us out there are familiar with, you know, maybe featuring Locke in there instead of Violet. But what do we actually know about this team, and what are the strengths and things that we need to consider? Well, for starters, they're going to be dealing heavy light slashing damage. We do know that this team heavily relies on that courage buff for its survivability. They're not really bringing any status effects that we need to worry about, so that's at least one thing that we can check off the list. But Elena does have an agility break that she likes to use. So keeping those things in mind, you know, I think it does put Helena in a pretty good position to deal with those units. You know, she does have the guaranteed hits. She has the courage removal in her skills. So let's take a look at the build that I've put together here, and we're going to start with the equipment. And I have my +6 dark gloves, and I've paired those with the silver rim spectacles for the 20 spirit penetration passive that they bring. And at least for right now, I do actually kind of like this combination a little bit better than the elven gloves that we looked at. But you could certainly opt to use the elven gloves and maybe a piece of armor such as the survival vest or the Galmia coat instead. In terms of the TMR, some nice tech choices here could be Dark Helena's TMR for a barrier, maybe Halloween Rariu's TMR for a re-raise, Dark Fina's TMR for the magic res penetration, or maybe you want to break out Ibarra's TMR and get that 100% magic up to just blow somebody up with her limit burst. For my build purpose today and going up against that light team, I have opted to use Thancred's TMR. And that's because I do want Helena to use her TP damage up buff, as well as her Immortal Spirit. And I do want to take advantage of the 15% light resist that Thancred's TMR will bring to help cut into the damage of Elena and Violet. Now for the Esper, I am using Dark Ramu here, and I didn't really talk about him earlier when we looked at the vision card, but this is just an insane Esper. You know, first and foremost, it's matching Shiva with the highest agility for an Esper in the game at 20. And then adding to that, it has 25 elemental attack, 25 human killer, 25 slash resistance. It even has some earth resistance in there as well. It also brings nice flexibility that you could even run this on a physical based unit as well. So it's definitely one of the best Espers that I've seen in the game in quite a while. and you'll definitely be wanting to get your hands on this one if you're going all in for Summer Helena. Now, looking at the vision cards, as per usual, I do have my trifecta defensive setup here. I'm bringing in the area resist from Ibarra's vision card, the single target resist from Esther's card, and then my agility up from the Salir vision card. In my secondary slots, I'm using the Dark Ramu card, Europa for some offensive potency, and then Aigayan for the party HP effect. So I do think this is a good all-around setup for hitting this light team. You will notice that I am pairing Helena here with Charlotte and Resnick. Helena is definitely going to be wanting a stout tank in front of her, and Charlotte can definitely be that, especially with Resnick healing and buffing them both from behind. And I do want to highlight specifically that once we get this Dark Ramu card here in Global, we will have actually 2 different vision cards that will give 20 spirit penetration to the lightning element. And that is one of the main reasons I have put both of those vision cards here on Helena. As we talked about, she's really lacking in that spirit penetration area, so she's going to get 30 spirit penetration from equipping these 2 cards. Now moving into my trust stones, and I have a little bit more of a unique setup here. On my first stone, I have that slash resistance as well as the agility debuff resistance. Remember, Elena is bringing that agility break, and it is an area of effect one. So I think that actually could come in pretty handy. On the middle stone, I have the HP and luck, pretty standard there for most of my builds. Now luck is one of the ones that you could look at swapping out if you wanted to have a more hyper-focused setup for Helena. And you could look at maybe bringing in an all-attack type or elemental debuff resistance there instead. For my last stone here, those light units really like to crit, so I'm bringing in that crit evasion to try and dull that a little bit. And the last passive there is for an increase in TP. And that's a passive that I would rarely use in builds. But specifically for Helena, with that new buff mechanic that she brings, I can actually see it being pretty valuable for her specifically, especially when we're talking about something like Guild Wars where you have multiple PvP rounds potentially, and you can start burning through that TP very, very quickly. Now looking on the right side, as always, I'm trying to push her offensive potency. So I'm going to push her crit damage, lightning attack, magic up, and magic res penetration. Now Helena won't be a unit that will crit each and every time. So that could be a passive that you could look to push out of the build. Maybe add some more utility, something like healing power, like we talked a little bit about earlier, could be another interesting one to use. So I'm tying all of these passives here into HP and magic sets respectively. The HP is going to get me a little bit more light resistance, and the magic set is going to get me a little bit more spirit penetration. And that will put her at a respectable 60 spirit penetration. Of course, you have to have all of these things, which is no small feat, but maybe something to aspire to if you're not able to get your hands on these vision cards. Her magic total is very nice here as well, and I was actually surprised to see the level of hit points that I was able to get on Helena. She's surpassing that 9,000 hit points plateau. So she should be able to take a couple of hits here against the team that we're building against and live to tell the tale. Now, if you are interested in taking a closer look at this build here that I've put together, I will go ahead and put a link to that in the description below. So what is the verdict today on Summer Helena? Starting with the positives, her magic level can definitely get up there. She's bringing that all new buffing mechanic where she's going to be using some of her TP to increase her overall damage. So I think that, along with the Imperil on her limit burst, will have her packing quite an offensive punch with large area of effect damage at her disposal. In terms of her survivability, it pretty much hinges on that immortal spirit. If she's not able to get that online or it gets dispelled, she's actually going to go down pretty easily. Assuming that she can get that online though, it does increase her survivability substantially, especially when you can start considering some of those damage absorption and regen type abilities that she has. But you will certainly want to have some kind of tank in front of this unit in auto play so that she doesn't get focused down immediately. Now, in terms of the team utility that she's bringing, she does have that Imperil that we've already talked about. She can dispel courage, which is very, very nice. And along with that, she has that huge diamond AoE with that 25% chance to stop, which is a very, very nice skill. On the other hand, in terms of the concerns that I have for this unit right now, she is very average statistically, so her stats and accuracy are really not going to scale all that well to any percentage-based buffs. It seems to me that she's taking the penalty for having a job that's based around the Energist and sort of the lower base stats that they tend to come along with, but she's not getting the Hyper Vitality passive to sort of make up for that and improve on those. My next concern is that she's really not competitive whatsoever when it comes to her spirit penetration. As we talked about, 0 spirit penetration for this unit innately. Now, sometimes when a unit has very low spirit penetration, they do make up for that with magic res penetration. And unfortunately, Helena doesn't really have that either. It is just 20%. And these penetration levels are just more akin to units that we were seeing over a year ago in the game, which kind of baffles me, on the latest 100 cost unit. So she's really going to have to rely on external sources to sort of get her up to a competitive level. Things like TMRs and vision cards like we talked about in the builds, or maybe even buffs from other units. Now, kind of along those same lines, sometimes when we see those lower penetration values, we have seen Gumi give them a second damage type to help make up for that, something like a magical strike based or magical missile based skill, for example. But unfortunately, Helena doesn't have that either. She is actually dealing just purely in magical based attacks. So my overall take here is that she's definitely going to have that niche against evade units, especially ones that have courage, as we talked about in the mock builds. I think though that with the general high accuracy of units and vision cards that we've seen in the game over the past months, evade just isn't as much of a problem as it was, just after the second anniversary. And even at that, my personal preference, when dealing with evade units is to rely on units that just have high overall general accuracy rather than going to 100% hits. And the main reason for that is because you have access then to your full kit rather than just a couple of skills. I think with these things in mind, this is a decent enough unit and, there is some things to like there, but she's definitely not blowing me away, whatsoever. Especially when I look at the stats and, some of the drawbacks that we've talked about. I'm just not sure that there's enough there for me to warrant the 100 cost or 42k Visior price tag that's going to come along with this unit. Even more so now that I've seen the White Mage job upgrades and in particular the skills that she has access to that did get upgraded. I'm very lukewarm on kind of how that's going to actually improve her standing and, and what she's capable of in the meta. My core issue with this unit kind of all circles back to those penetration values that we've mentioned several times, over this preview. You really have to jump through major hoops to get her to just a competitive spot to where most units are kind of starting now with their passives. So I do think if one of her passives was bringing that sort of standard 40 spirit penetration that we've seen on most magical damage dealers out there these days, I think I would feel a lot differently about this unit. Alright guys, so that is my review on Summer Helena today, and I think as it was kind of easy to see there in the last section, I'm not really over the moon on this unit, so sorry if this one was one that you were excited about. Maybe evade is just more of a concern on the Japanese side and maybe it was more needed over there, but even at that I'm not sure that that is the case. And certainly on the global side, we have so many highly accurate units now that it is much more difficult to run an evade team reliably. In terms of future revisions, she does still have the Paladin subjob that we talked about. So I think we can still hold out a little bit of hope that maybe that gets a very nice upgrade in the future. And maybe that will upgrade her stock, in some way. I think that the second cast of courage, would help her out certainly. But I think until that point, I'm going to transition any excitement I had for this unit into the next Global Fest unit that we should probably be seeing here very, very soon. Is there something I'm missing on this unit, guys? Obviously she can clean house on less tanky units, and evade units in particular are generally less tanky. Otherwise, I just see this unit as relatively easy to deal with by just bulking up on my spirit and magic resistance. That said, guys, what are your thoughts out there? If she does end up coming to Global here next week, are you going to pull for her? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.